Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Psychology for Dummies, 3rd edition, by Adam Cash, Psy D. Narrated by Matthew Josdal. Publisher's note: in this audio edition, you will hear references to figures and tables present in the print and e-book formats of this book. Limit of liability, disclaimer of warranty. The contents of this work are intended to further general scientific research, understanding, and discussion only, and are not intended and should not be relied upon as recommending or promoting a specific method, diagnosis, or treatment by physicians for any particular patient. The publisher and the author make no representations or warranties with respect to the accuracy or completeness of the contents of this work, and specifically disclaim all warranties, including without limitation any implied warranties of fitness for a particular purpose. In view of ongoing research, equipment modifications, changes in governmental regulations, and the constant flow of information, the listener is urged to review and evaluate the information provided in the package insert or instructions for each medicine, equipment, or device for, among other things, any changes in the instructions or indication of usage, and for added warnings and precautions. Listeners should consult with a specialist where appropriate. Neither the publisher nor the author shall be liable for any damages arising herefrom. Introduction. So you've bought Psychology for Dummies. How does that make you feel? I hope you're feeling pretty good. And why shouldn't you be? You're going to discover all kinds of interesting information about the basics of human mental processes and behavior. I think that everybody is interested in people, their thoughts, emotions, and behavior. People are fascinating, and that includes you. Humans often defy explanation and evade prediction. Figuring people out can be pretty hard. Just when you think that you've figured someone out, bang, he surprises you. Now I know that some of you may be thinking, actually, I'm a pretty good judge of people. I've got a handle on things. If that's the case, that's great. Some folks do seem to have a more intuitive understanding of people than others. For the rest of us, though, there's psychology. About this book. Psychology for Dummies is an introduction to the field of psychology. I tried to write this book using plain English and everyday examples, with the hope that it will be real and applicable to everyday life. I've always felt that tackling a new subject is more enjoyable when it has real-world importance. Psychology is full of jargon, so much jargon that it even has its own dictionary, aptly named the Dictionary of Psychology. This book is for those of you who are interested in what people do, think, say, and feel, but want the information presented in a clear and easily understandable manner. Warning: the information in this reference is not intended to substitute for expert psychological, healthcare, or medical advice or treatment. It is designed to help you make informed choices. Because each individual is unique, a psychologist, healthcare practitioner, or physician must diagnose conditions and supervise treatments for each individual health problem. If an individual is under a psychologist's or physician's care and receives advice contrary to information provided in this reference, the psychologist's or physician's advice should be followed, as it is based on the unique characteristics of that individual. Conventional language for psychologists can sound like gibberish to someone who has never had a psychology class. As I state earlier in this chapter, I try to stay away from jargon and technical language in this book. You may come across an attempt at a joke or two. I tend to take a lighter approach to life, but sometimes people don't get my sense of humor. If I try to crack a joke in the text and it bombs, please don't be too harsh. I'm a psychologist after all, and I don't think we're known for our sense of humor. I hope I don't come across as insensitive or cavalier either. That is certainly not my intention. Sometimes talking about psychology can be pretty dry, so I try to liven things up with examples and personal stories. I make no references to any patients I've ever had in treatment or seen in my practice. If there appears to be a resemblance, it's purely coincidental. In fact, I took great care in preserving the privacy and confidentiality of the people I have worked with. Foolish assumptions. You can find a lot of psychology books out there. Many of them are either too technical and specialized or cover too narrow an area of psychology. Here are some of the reasons why I think Psychology for Dummies is the book for you. You've got a lot of questions about people. You've got a lot of questions about yourself. You're thinking about going into the field of psychology. You're currently studying psychology or a related discipline, such as social work or counseling. You're interested in psychology but don't have the time or the money to take a psychology course. You've got people all figured out, and you want to see if I'm on track. Icons used in this book. Throughout this book, you hear icons mentioned. They're there to help you easily find certain types of information. Here's a list of the icons you hear. Tip: when you hear this icon, I'm trying to emphasize a bit of information that may come in handy someday. Warning: with this icon, I'm trying to alert you to information that is a must-know if you're going to learn psychology. Remember, don't forget it. When you hear this icon, I am reminding you of the highlights from that section. It flags the "if you learn just one thing from this chapter" type of stuff, so pay attention. Technical stuff. This icon flags discussions that may rise above the level you need to basically understand the topic at hand. These sections can safely be skipped without harming your comprehension of the main point. Beyond the book. Check out the online cheat sheet for quick access to information about the differences between psychologists and other mental health professionals, and coping with psychological crises. To get this cheat sheet, simply go to dummies.com and type Psychology for Dummies cheat sheet in the search box. Where to go from here? Psychology is a broad field. I think you'll find that the organization of this book lets you check out what you're interested in and leave the rest of the stuff behind if you want. If you're new to the subject, by all means start with Chapter 1 and go. But you don't have to listen to it start to finish. Kind of like a cafeteria. Take what you like and leave the rest. But hey, if I can write an entire book on psychology, I think you can listen to an entire book on this stuff. Besides, I think you'll like it. Psychology is a great subject. Enjoy. 1. Getting started with psychology. In this part, understand what psychology is and get an overview of the field. Get in touch with your inner armchair psychologist by exploring the concept that we are all acting psychologists, analyzing and assessing human behavior every day. Find out about the professional practice of psychology with an introduction to its scientific nature and the different approaches psychologists use to investigate and understand people. Get to know the ethical guidelines that psychologists are expected to follow during treatment and in applied psychology. Chapter 1. The Purpose of Psychology. In this chapter, defining psychology, understanding how people work, figuring out how psychology can help. What is the purpose of psychology? To gain knowledge of human minds and behavior through scientific study and research. To apply that knowledge for the benefit of society, and to improve lives of people by using scientific methods. To communicate and teach that knowledge and application to others. And what's the purpose of this book? Well, to fulfill those 3 goals, of course. I wrote it to educate, teach, and to be helpful. Honestly, I am a serious psychology nerd. I see psychology as an extremely interesting subject, a set of useful methods, and a great opportunity to learn more about people. I geek out on this stuff. I used to wander the psychology stacks of my university library just looking for something interesting, something that caught my eye, to discover something, to learn more. In essence, this book is a cumulation of my effortful curiosity. I hope to stimulate and fuel yours. Remember, we are all psychologists, really. Some of us just happen to be professional psychologists. The difference between a professional psychologist and a non-professional psychologist is really a matter of degree. Get it? Separated by focus, time spent, materials consumed, and methods used. Over the years, I have been asked, sometimes respectfully and nicely, sometimes not, these questions. What makes you better at this than me? What do you know that I don't? Well, I believe it's really a matter of degree, perspective, and the psychologist tools I use to see and do the psychologist thing. Professionals in any field seem to immerse themselves in it. Again, it's a matter of degree. We all occupy the space of a psychologist to one degree or another. Psychologists just spend more time engaged in conscious and deliberate effort to stay in that space and look at the world from that viewpoint. We spend our time and careers occupying that space and doing the psychologist thing, occasionally coming out of the trance to share what we have seen, think, and found to be objectively true, at least as far as science allows us. But ultimately, psychology is only one way of looking at people and the world they interact with. Is psychology right about people? It may or may not be, but in an attempt to live up to that challenge, psychology uses the standards of science to do so, and if conducting and practicing psychological science lends itself to some use, exposes someone to one new idea or way of thinking, and helps just one person live a better life, then it has served a valuable role in the world. It is not privileged per se. It cannot explain everything about being human. Come on, that would be just pompous and downright impossible. Humbly, psychologists go about their business and hope to offer something to the world. One psychologist figuring it all out isn't the goal. I have countless more bad ideas than good ones, so I need to be part of a community of thinkers, other psychologists and other scientists. I can put my ideas to the empirical test, share what I find, allow corrective feedback, and revise as I move forward conducting psychological science. Doing psychology is a thinking, doing, and communicating endeavor. I hope to do that with this book. Before I give you a definition, I'm going to engage in a therapy cliché. Tell me what you think. Tell me how you feel. There's an old joke about psychologists. How many psychologists does it take to screw in a light bulb? 2. One to do it, and the other one to ask, how does that make you feel? What are some of the ideas that come to mind when people think about the topic of psychology? It depends on whom you ask. Sometimes I imagine myself as a guest on a television talk show. I'm bombarded by questions from the audience that I can't answer. My heart starts to pound. I begin to sweat. I start to stand up so that I can run off the set, but then something comes to me that keeps me in my seat. I imagine asking the people in the audience what they think psychology is, and why they think a psychologist can answer questions about people. Whys, whats, and hows of people. Before I provide a definition of psychology, I want you to take a few minutes to jot down some of your ideas on what psychology is. Why did this book catch your eye? Are you looking for answers? Looking for advice? How are you going to get those answers? These are the three main questions that psychology is concerned with as well. Why do people do what they do? What are the component parts of why and how? How do people do what they do? Here are some why questions. Why am I happy? Why can't I stop feeling sad? Why did she break up with me? Why didn't I say that as I walk away from an argument? Why did I just say that as I get into an argument? Here are some what questions. What are emotions? What is mental illness? What is intelligence? What are thoughts? Here are some how questions. How can I remember more? How can I get my 2-year-old to stop throwing tantrums? How does the mind work? How does language develop? These why, what, how questions comprise the intellectual and philosophical core of psychology. Remember. So it's finally time to define it. Psychology is the scientific study of human behavior and mental processes. Psychology attempts to uncover what people do, along with why, what, and how they do it. A useful metaphor. Building a person. Metaphors abound in psychology. They are used to provide extremely oversimplified and overarching explanatory models of people. Psychologists Deidre Gentner and Jonathan Gruden conducted a review of the metaphors used in psychology and identified 256. Over the years, people have been likened to hairless apes, computers, machines, nervous systems, and a host of others. However, remember that people are not models, but the models can be helpful in understanding people. Now I'm going to enter into the fray with my own metaphor, for better or worse. I don't think this metaphor is particularly unique, however, and there's likely chance that I borrowed it from someone else. But I think it's a good one, so here it is. When I try to imagine all the reasons people do what they do, what they use to do it, and how they do it, I often run with a mad scientist approach. I've always thought that one of the best ways to answer the why, what, and how questions would be to think about building a person and then set that person out performing the tasks of personhood, doing what persons do. Well, I'm not talking about actually building one like Dr. Frankenstein did, out of parts and brains and electricity, but creating a blueprint of a person's mind and behavior, performing functions embedded in context, like a performance space of sorts, in the way that basketball players play basketball, singers give performances, and people do people stuff. In therapy, when people try to explain a particular behavior or situation to me, I often say, "Can you make it happen now? Can you show me?" For example, a parent may be telling me how his child hits him when he tells the child to do something, and I'll say, "Show me. Make it happen." I can assure you that everyone is kept safe, and this is done ethically. The most common response is a puzzled or disturbed look on the parent's face. The point is, if they can cause it to happen, then they can uncause it to happen too, and that means they understand why and how it's happening. This is a type of reverse psychological engineering for figuring out the why, what, and how questions of human behavior. It's also a good example of an empirical approach, inasmuch as the process is observable and testable. There may be a day when psychology reaches a pinnacle of knowing and understanding all the determinants of behavior, all the ingredients of the human mind, and all the processes. Maybe the field can figure it all out through that reverse engineering process mentioned earlier. Or at the very least, maybe psychology will figure out people, and all the information that experts gather can be stored or formulated into an algorithm or recipe for making people, that one day a super-intelligent robotic life form can utilize to recreate the human species thousands of years after it becomes extinct. I did say that I sometimes think like a mad scientist, right? Yes, this is the kind of blueprint or overlay I like to use to understand what psychology is. Why do the parts and processes do it? What are the parts or ingredients of a person? How do we go about performing functions using those parts and ingredients to achieve the why? So I guess my metaphor is Frankenstein's monster. Maybe think about it as Frankenstein's machine, or Dr. Cash's machine, or maybe even a monster machine. Why? A first principle of my mad scientist vision of psychology is that building a human requires you to know what the person's function is. After all, engineers don't build things without knowing what they're supposed to do. Only with a purpose in mind can you know what materials are necessary and how they work together. The foundations of this function approach are built on a philosophy known as functionalism, which is the notion that the mind, mental processes, and behavior are tools for adaptive functioning that lead to a human functioning most effectively in his or her environment, survival and perpetuation of the species. Like all other carbon-based living organisms on planet Earth, human beings are staying alive machines. I'm not saying there is no meaning to life. Quite the contrary. I'm saying that the function of life is to be alive, to stay alive, and to perpetuate life. But there's got to be more than that, right? Wrong book. Try Philosophy for Dummies or Religion for Dummies. What? From a psychological standpoint, what does the human staying alive machine need in order to fulfill its function of existing, staying alive, and perpetuating? Well, if you've ever put together a do-it-yourself piece of furniture, you know that the instructions usually start out with a parts list. Psychological science has already put together quite an impressive psychological parts list. Bodies and all the subparts. Brains, hearts, hormones, genes, motor skills. Minds and all the subparts. See chapters 4 to 9. Consciousness, sensations and perceptions, including vision, hearing, taste, smell, touch, balance, and pain. Thinking, which manages attending, remembering, forming concepts, problem-solving, deciding, and intelligence. Communicating, including verbal and nonverbal expressions, such as body language, gestures, speech, and language. Motivations, emotions, selves. Other people, their minds, their feelings, their motivations, their brains. How? I've talked about the why and the what, so what about the how? This is where psychology can get extremely interesting. This is where the rubber meets the road, how whys and whats interact through the operations and processes of the mind and behavior. Here is a list of some of those operations and processes. Sensing and perceiving. Moving. Fueling. Learning, as in the ability to learn from the environment. Thinking. Paying attention. Remembering. Being motivated. Feeling. Socializing. Growing. Troubleshooting. All these parts, developed and assembled, go about their tasks within the world, right? But the world acts upon them, influences them, impacts them. Whether that context is dealing with other people, interacting with technology, or being chased by something dangerous. The mad scientist's job would be incomplete without looking at the world around the assembled parts. So I've assembled my human being, switched it on, and let it loose to go about its primary function of surviving. I think I've equipped it with all it needs in order to survive. But then it happens. Change. That's right. Something unexpected happens, and my human begins floundering, struggling, and verging on failing to achieve its primary function, how could I have forgotten that the world is not a static place? My creation is dealing with the environment in ways that I should have anticipated. So I go back to the drawing board to add the following functions and abilities to keep the why going with its parts and processes: coping and adapting, repairing, thriving. Putting it all back together again. In case you were wondering, and worried, I am not engaged in an actual build-a-human project, except for having a model to work from. But if I did want my own Frankenstein's monster, I'd have a very solid foundation and a good blueprint. Each of a person's parts, processes, and sources of help represents a section or chapter of Psychology for Dummies 3rd edition. Remember. However, before we dive into later chapters, I feel compelled to mention one last thing. It is obvious that psychology can be very reductionist. That is, it tries to take an extremely complex phenomenon, people, and break it down into parts and simple explanations. We've broken apart Humpty Dumpty, but can we put him back together again? People are not made up of X, Y, and Z. People are not just whys, whats, and hows. We're not theories, models, experiments, or Dr. Cash's monsters. The longer I am a psychologist, the longer I appreciate the complex, messy, and mysterious nature of people, despite doing this for over 25 years. There is never a day that goes by that I don't learn something new about people, realize I was wrong about something or someone, and am humbled. I just want listeners to know that despite my efforts to break down psychology, and in turn people, this is only my reductionist attempt to understand people, and I hope I do it with respect, compassion, and humility. Chapter 2. Thinking and Behaving as a Psychologist. In this chapter, figuring ourselves out, understanding what psychologists do, coming up with models and doing research, being ethical. Why psychologists do psychology is to figure people out and help them. But how do they do that exactly? Well, let's use the definition of psychology to ask it another way. What mental processes and behaviors do psychologists do and engage in when they are doing psychology? Psychology is a thinking, doing, and communicating endeavor. Each of us is an amateur psychologist of sorts. Professional psychologists aren't the only ones who try to figure people out. We all do. We all think, do, and communicate about people. Stop gossiping. When I started taking psychology courses, I had my own ideas about people. Sometimes I agreed with what I was exposed to and learning about, and sometimes I disagreed wholeheartedly. I'm not alone. Most people seem to have specific ideas about what makes others tick. Sometimes they match up with reality, and sometimes they don't. This matching up process is at the core of scientific inquiry. We want our ideas to match up with reality, don't we? In order to get it right, or find the truth, we develop theories, conduct research. For example, collect data by observation and with interviews, tests, surveys, and so on, and conduct experiments. We do this over and over again until we are satisfied that we've got it figured out, have a solid idea of what is real, and have a solid set of facts. But there's a catch. Just when we think we've got it right, something comes along that throws it all into disarray. New data requires a reconfiguration of what we thought we knew. As such, science is a constantly updating endeavor. The more we know, the more we question, and the more we need to update our understanding of reality. One of my favorite professors.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?